The purpose of notes is to ensure that providers have the information that they need to make successful housing referrals that do not already exist on the Volt form. So for example, some of these are a VASH team may, in case conferencing, share that someone's voucher has expired and they need to get back in contact with someone. Another example is if someone's being denied from a housing resource, that's not something that automatically populates in the Volt form notes. So if you're a housing provider who's having to deny someone, for example, due to no contact, you can see the way in which that's important to know for their next intervention that may be successful. So the way we want to ensure that we are knowing who's adding notes in, because we are all using this section, please date your notes with the appropriate date that you are making the note outside of case conferencing or during case conferencing, and what the note is about, your initials, or at least your first initial last name, and the organization you're with. This is to ensure if people are making any notes between or updating any notes between case conferencing, if there's any questions from the case conferencing group on what that note means or how we can follow up with it, that everyone knows who to contact or ask more information about. Notes are very important to ensure that we can follow up with those households. So please be sure to have the date, your initial and last name, and the organization you're working with. This is to ensure that if you are making updates for households that may be served by multiple organizations, that we know who it is that is making that note and is making that determination in case there are any additional questions from new providers working with that same household. Another example is when you are a housing provider and you are using the option to deny or enroll a household, that you are really coming back to the Volt form and making those updates when appropriate. So for example here, CPC had to deny a veteran due to no contact. And so they moved the housing plan to no contact and had that denial note put in here so that we know even if that household was routed to CPC, that was not actually successful. Due to inactivity happening over a 90-day period being really what moves someone to an inactive list, we want to ensure that we have this information available, as it may take 90 days within the system for that household to move to inactive. So we want to ensure that we can do a little bit of an override should that happen if we know that information ahead of time. The next area we want to be taking a look at are toggles and the agency assigned to or routed to. These two areas are covered in our Volt form. So as you can see, we have our agency assigned to, and if you look in the veteran by name list, that is related to the routed to column that we can sort to see which organizations are working with that household and which are being the main group that should be updating the veteran by name list and the Volt form on behalf of that household. It's very important that as this changes, if you are no longer the agency that's able to work with that household for any number of reasons, that you are bringing those households back to case conferencing, or you're making those warm handoffs and you're updating this. Again, this is how we're using the veteran by name list. This is the column we're using on the veteran by name list to know which organization is mainly working with that household on exiting their housing crisis, and how we are able to then sort in the list who needs to be responsible for making those updates. For example, who's working with WDVA? You can see that here's a list. I think we've got a couple more filters on, so there's definitely some more folks, but you can see a list of the people that they are working with those households. In the event that that household is no longer working with WDVA, you can come in here, make the change in who they're routed to, and in addition to which agency a household is assigned to, we also have certain toggles that are available and used sporadically in our veteran by name list management. If someone has been verified to have served in the U.S. Armed Forces, we do like to toggle that so that we're ensuring that this information about registration and eligibility is done because we got the information from the VA. So that's what we mean by verified. If there is a VASH exception that's required because somebody may have been routed to a housing intervention that's not going to be the most successful for them and they do need progressive engagement, we would want to also toggle that there's been a VASH exception that's been accepted. We do want to make sure that if this is being toggled, that the VA is in the loop about that VASH exception. So please make sure you're bringing that to case conferencing. There's also the option to flag for re-review. So working out in case conferencing when would be the best to use this toggle. We have the option to add additional toggles should anyone see a need to do that, and add this to the Volt form so that more information can be toggled for households if it makes sense.
Don't forget to save. It is very important that this is saved. It's a lot of information. It does not automatically save. And when you do save, you will see at the top of the form your changes have been saved successfully.
We want to go over some best practices working with the veteran by name list that have come out of the last year of providers working on keeping this up to date and making the appropriate changes as needed to ensure that the veteran situation is updated within the system so that any type of intervention that's needed is reflected in the by name list. So one of the best practices is when you're determining you can no longer work with a veteran household. This may be due to eligibility, it may be due to the fact that they're no longer in contact, or it may be that you have helped that household to exit the homeless service system and they're no longer experiencing homelessness. So if you're able to create a warm handoff between organizations outside of the case conferencing space, go ahead and make that update here to which organization that household has been connected to. If they're not present, or if there's not an option here, we can add an other column, but we haven't seen that as a need quite yet. So we could add an other option the same as we have here with our housing plan, but we need to see a little longer with organizations on if there are others who are working with veterans. So if you're able to make that warm handoff between case conferencing, of course, please make that happen and make the appropriate update here for which agency that household is working with. In the case that you're unable to make a warm handoff to another organization that may be best to serve that veteran household, please do bring those households back to case conferencing and make it clear that you are no longer able to work with them and you need to be able to find another intervention for them. This may also be if a household is if their choice is no longer to work with your organization, bringing that household back to case conferencing to ensure that they are being routed to the next best intervention. Let's try this example. Someone is SSVF or rapid rehousing is their housing plan. If they were reviewed during the case conferencing due to an update of their VI SPDAT, and previously they were routed to CPC, let's say that they are now actually working with YWCA because that's who did the update to their VI SPDAT. We can go ahead and make that update to YWCA. That warm handoff can happen, and that is the change that you would need to make. Their housing plan would still be SSVF, and it would be reviewed that this is what was occurring. And so the YWCA routed to would now show up when we did a routed to choice here for who that veteran household would be working with. So as you can see, that is who the household would then be routed to with the information for YWCA to know, all right, these are the households that have been routed to us, and we need to be responsible for updating the veteran by name list with what the outcome of their interaction with us is as an organization. In the event the YWCA then receives this referral and is able to house this household, after that has happened, the YWCA should come in here, go ahead and put that the household is now inactive and housed because they were able to house that household, and update this Volt note to share that that is also what has happened. We then could say that the veteran household was housed with SSVF on this date, if that's important to put in there. This information also can be found in HMAS when the move-in date is added to their enrollment for that program. So then we could say they are inactive and housed, and the household will appear on the veteran inactive list as a household that is now permanently housed. As we continue looking through the veteran by name list and continue to keep it updated, we may have additional updates that are needed for this training, and we'll add those as time goes on. Please do check back, and thanks for joining.